What is up, gamers? In this video, we're gonna be talking about Gandeeva. Gandeeva is probably the new best deck in Standard now. And because of that, the deck is a lot more expensive in English than it is in JP. So, this video, I'm gonna be taking you through my current build and where I've been taking the deck so far. And also, I will have a budget version of the build later on. To start out, we have the ride line. So, the new starter, the new grade 1, the grade 2, and the grade 3. We'll start with the grade 1. So when you would discard to ride this grade 2 and your opponent has 2 or less rear guards, then you don't have to discard to ride. And if you ride over him and your opponent has 2 or more rear guards, then you can call him out to rear. It lets you keep an additional cards, then whenever you get to grade 3 turn, then it's pretty good. And you have an extra unit or a card you can guard with potentially later on. And then the grade 2, whenever you ride Gandeeva on top of it, Gandeeva's counterblast cost becomes free for the turn. So with how the current build is, there is a ton of counterblast costs. This helps more easily maintain it. And then our main grade 3, which is Gandeeva. So Gandeeva has 3 skills. So when your opponent's rear guard is retired during your turn, you can choose a card from your drop and bind it face down. And then continuous Vanguard, during your turn, all of your front row units get plus 2k power for each face down card in your bind zone. And then if your bind zone has 5 or more face down cards, Gandeeva gains a crit. And his last skill is act once per turn, counterblast 1. Choose 5 of your opponent's rear guards with different grades from each other, and you reveal the top 5 cards of your deck. And then you retire all of the units chosen that has the same grades as the cards revealed. And if you retired 1 or less cards, you draw a card and bind a card from your drop zone face down. Why is this good? Basically, there are a ton of ways you can bind cards face down, and Gandeeva allows you to consistently get to the +1 crit whenever you ride up to grade 3, and you can just start hitting really big numbers. So usually on your first grade 3 turn, Gandeeva will have like 5 bound, and then he will have a crit, and then your front row will have plus 10k. So you basically have Persona Ride active the moment you ride grade 3, and then on the following turn you can get it up to like 10 to 15 depending on how many rear guards are called and what pieces you have in your hand at that time. And you can just hit really big numbers, have your front row be plus 20k or more, and if you Persona Road as well, then it's even more power. So overall, the ride line's pretty good. Now, there is another option you can use, which is the Bhavsagra ride line. And then you also play one of either the shield or the sword, depending on what you want to do. So the grade 1, whenever you ride it over the grade 0, you can Soul Blast 1, look for the sword or the shield in your deck, add it to hand. And then the grade 2 is whenever it's placed on Vanguard, you can put in arms order from your drop zone into your hand. So this allows you to deck thin 1. And then if you ride Halibhadra, then you have a free discard outlet as well. So what ends up happening is you ride the grade 1, you search for the shield, then you discard the shield to ride the grade 2, then you add the shield back to hand, and then you discard the shield on the following turn and ride Gandeeva. So you're able to basically consistently have a free ride up during each turn. The only time you actually discard that it matters is on the name a card ride. So why do I play the Gandeeva ride line over this? It's because I really want the extra soul that I keep with the grade 1 majority of the time. And if they call a big board, then that's fine. Then Gandeeva has a stronger turn later on where I can just retire the whole field. And then I can call this out and like counter push as well. Now, if your deck isn't as resource intensive, then the Bhavsagra ride line can be pretty good and is usually better. I just currently prefer this, but I'm still mix and matching every once in a while. Next, grade 3s. 3 Persona Ride. Persona Ride's pretty good in here. You're already hitting like a truck, so adding more power to it and just making everything basically PG or die is pretty good. Also, this current build uses a lot of soul, so having the Persona Rides to be able to use the soul more easier is a lot better. It makes the deck more consistently able to close the game out on turn 4. Then I run 3 Stugna. So when placed on rear guard, if your Vanguard's Gandeeva, then you can Soul Blast 1, bind one of your other rear guards, and then you retire an opponent's rear guard. And if you retired nothing, you draw a card and bind a card face down from your drop zone. So this synergizes really well with Gandeeva because this will basically guarantee you bind 2. And then if you retire something, then you retire an opponent's rear guard, or you will draw a card if you did it. So this is pretty good overall because it's basically the only card that binds 2 by itself. So you can plop this down, and then you can plop another one down, bind this, and then bind another thing. And then combined with Gandeeva potentially retiring something, you basically instantly have 3 instances of bind on your first grade 3 turn. So then your front row will have plus 6k at minimum, assuming you have this in your hand. And then easily more depending on what other pieces you have. So yeah, I think this is pretty good. And it's a Soul Blast instead of a Counter Blast. So Soul isn't as intensive in here. It just makes the build way more consistent. And then 3 Best Harvest. So Best Harvest is very silly in here. So it's a grade 3 order with the skill that you give your Vanguard the ability for the turn that auto on Vanguard whenever your opponent's rear guard is retired during your main phase, you can draw a card. So why is this good in Gandeeva? Gandeeva doesn't have draw power unless your opponent doesn't have a board. Naturally, some of the counterplay that you could do against Gandeeva is calling a full field and then weakening the extension that Gandeeva is able to put out. But with Best Harvest, it just removes that counterplay, because now if they call a full field and then you play Best Harvest and then start retiring everything, you're drawing a bunch of cards anyway. And this can get pretty silly with Gandeeva himself, because if you only retire one thing off his skill and you have Best Harvest active, then you'll draw off Best Harvest and you'll draw off Gandeeva, and then you'll still bind to from Gandeeva's on retire bind something effect, and then since you bound 1 or less, you also bind something from the counterblast effect. Yeah, if you just have like more things you can retire, this just really raises the ceiling of this deck. You'll basically always have a pretty decent sized hand. So if they were to hit Gandeeva, they would probably choice restrict this with it. They will never ban the card really unless it becomes out of control in Eugene, but that's Eugene, so probably not gonna happen. So yeah, Best Harvest is just silly in here. Next for grade 2s, we have 4 Drag Ritter Alpha card. So auto on rear guard, when your Gandeeva Vanguard attacks a grade 3 or higher Vanguard, you counterblast 1, bind Alpha card face down, and then check top 5 cards of your deck, and you call something, and then shuffle the rest back in. So this is how we multi-attack in the deck, and this does so many things. So the first thing is it binds itself, so it adds an additional bind, and Gandeeva gives power to your front row. The second thing is it's multi-attack, so the unit you get off of this also has the power boost from Gandeeva still. And then this, since it gets bound, adds an additional 2000 power to Gandeeva's effect. So you're able to just have like another really big attack. And it also calls mid-battle phase. Now, right now, this doesn't matter that much, but if we get more cards that say win place call something, so right now we have Tanya, where whenever you call it, you can call a trigger or call a grade 0 from your drop zone. So you could potentially play Tanya with this and then have like really big attacks and have a way easier time creating multi-attack in the process. At the moment though, it's not very necessary and it just naturally hurts the consistency of the deck. But just keep that in mind whenever you see Dragon Empire reveals that Alpha card can potentially call that thing mid-battle phase, and it could get silly sometimes. So yeah, Alpha card is pretty necessary right now. It's very solid. Next, for Rugiant. So at first, I wasn't a fan of this card because it costed a counterblast, and this deck is already pretty counterblast intensive. But after shifting my build to where I can play this, it's really nice. So when placed on rearguard, if you have a Gandeeva Vanguard, you counterblast 1 and retire an opponent's rearguard. But if you didn't retire, you draw a card and bind a card from your drop zone face down. This is really good because it draws for 1, and you basically guarantee draw and bind because you want to use this when you don't have anything to retire. And you can just like call, set up a bind card, draw a card, and then replace itself. You can also, it combos pretty well with Sturgna because this is just a vanilla after you place it. So you place this, do its effect, then call Sturgna, and then bind this, and then you get Sturgna effect. So you can very easily set up your bind zone because of this card. And it's just on play counterblast draw, basically, is what this does a lot of the time. Incorporating this in the build has made it feel a lot better, and having just additional ways to draw cards outside of needing Best Harvest is just really nice. And then last for grade 2s, I'm playing 3 of the cycle cards. So with discard from your hand during your ride phase, you can Soul Blast 1, put this on the bottom of your deck, and draw a card. And when placed on rearguard, if you Persona Road this turn, then you retire all of your opponent's rearguards in the same column as it. This is pretty nice because this, additionally with the grade 1 ride line, just lets you maintain a hand going into your grade 3 turn, because Gandeeva doesn't do anything before hitting grade 3 because so far basically every card needs you to either Persona Ride or be on Gandeeva. So our early game is pretty weak, so this just helps us maintain a hand size and keep up with card advantage. And then also being able to retire 2 for Counterblast 1 is also really big later in the game, because at some point your opponent's gonna have to call rearguards if they want to win. unless they're Overlord. And then once they do that, then that's when you can accelerate your bind zone really well. And this just helps out so much with it. So yeah, I think this is pretty solid in here. And it just really helps maintaining advantage whenever you're trying to fight later in the game or fight early game at all. Hey, you viewer, are you one of the 84% of people not subscribed? Well, I hope you have a good day and please subscribe. Next, grade 1s for perfect guards. Yeah, nothing additional to say here. It is just good. A lot of decks hit really high numbers now, so having as many perfect guards as you can in your deck is pretty important, and being able to find these is pretty important. We have enough draw power in here where we can find these at least 1 or 2 pretty consistently. And then next, for Boken. So I got this idea from Derek's video. There'll be a link to it in the description, but this card is actually so sick in here. I like it a lot more than I expected. So while it's on your back or rear guard and your Gandeeva Vanguard attacks, you can bind this face down and counter charge 1, as long as you have 3 or more bound face down already. So why is this good? This removes basically all the counterblast issues this deck would naturally have, because we have 1, 2, 3, 4 different units we've gone over so far that counterblast, and we want to use these as much as possible already. Like, we want to use Gandeeva every turn, we want to use Alpha Card and multi-attack when we can, and we want to use this mainly on our first grade 3 turn, and then we can potentially use this on the later turns. So this just really helps on maintaining the counterblast, and you're able to just keep up with all of the counterblasts you're spending, and you'll consistently be able to make big plays every turn. Now, instead of this, you could play like cards that are a bit more free and that don't use nearly as much counterblast, but I think the strongest version of this deck is when you are able to use your counterblast skills naturally. I tried a build that didn't run this and didn't run Rugiant and ran other things, and I didn't like it as much. It felt a bit more clunky, but this just like makes sure you can consistently do your plays all the time. And then the last grade 1 is to burn Aya. So at the end of the battle that it boosted, if a player's rear guard was retired this turn, you can bind it face down and draw a card. Benaya, I initially played a lot of it in my initial build, but over time, I've realized I'm like almost never calling this. Or whenever I do call it, it's like really awkward sometimes, because you have to put it behind your rear guards, and sometimes you want to like be able to attack with the first one by itself unboosted and then attack with Vanguard, and then you can attack with this boosted and then have it go bound and draw. But it's just like pretty awkward, because if you do that, then you miss out on an extra power boost from Gandeeva effect. But then if you do it first, then this attack is a little bit weaker to damage triggers. Now sure, this falls in the same category because it will get bound no matter what whenever your Vanguard attacks, but this just gives you more advantage because you're able to consistently use your skills, and this just replaces itself, which isn't bad. Like, I still run it, but I like it better at a lower count than at a higher count. It's felt a lot better in that case. So yeah, Banana it's all right. And then moving on to triggers, for heals are pretty good. You could play these as the crit heals, where the 25k shields if your opponent's unit has a crit outside from a trigger effect. But currently I'm just playing 4 vanilla heals, and then once I have a better feel for the meta, then I can change it up. Then we have 8 crit. So crits are pretty good in here because Gandeeva just makes our power really obnoxiously high, and we're able to basically turn those into really high threatening attacks, and we can have like 40k plus swings that also have a crit on them outside of Gandeeva. So yeah, they're just pretty good. You don't need the effect crits being Burning Flail, because unless if you like hit a bunch of the cyclers throughout your ride turns, then you're not really using much soul outside of Stugna, and so you don't really need the soul from it. And the plus 2k doesn't fully change a lot. There are very, very niche scenarios, and if you have like really odd bind zone numbers where that 2k could matter, but just having a 5k booster or a 5k attacker even that has a Gandeeva boost is just better in most cases. And then 3 effect fronts. So these could be draws if you really wanted. I like fronts more in here for a couple reasons. One, the numbers are already naturally really high, so if we add a front trigger to that power, it turns them unguardable, kind of like Persona Ride does. And then it's also a 20k shield. Naturally, our hand is going to be pretty small because we're constantly calling things down and doing a bunch of on-place effects to be able to do our plays. Now, yes, we do have quite a bit of draw power as well. But a lot of the time, we'll go into the opponent's turn with like a 6 to 7 card hand, which isn't the highest amount. Now, with a draw trigger, it could be like one or two more throughout the game, but then you'll end up having the 2-card guard a lot of things later in the game because of Gandeeva giving power, Persona Ride power, Press power, all of the additional power gain we have in the game. So being able to use fronts as a 1-card guard is really handy a lot of the time. Now, if you have the draws and you want to play them, go ahead. I just personally like fronts at the moment. I'm still experimenting a bit with it. And then Drag Veda. This won't change even with the new Cray Elemental OTs. These should be banned, but with Griffo Gila, they're never going to be banned. So Drag Veda's really good in here because Gandeeva gains a crit and you can potentially like call Alpha Car off Alpha Car, and then you hit an OT on Gandeeva swing, and then you'll have even more attacks outside of that. Most of the time you won't play like that unless you only have Alpha Car as a good call target. But yeah, just having a 100 million double crit swing is pretty bonkers. So now I want to go over some budget options and just a slight change you can do to the build. Okay, so for budget options, first thing is Sanctitude. This card's $25. It's not that impactful a lot of the time. There's not really anything in the format with a really big guard restrict. Like, this is just for Jet, basically. And Messiah, but you already have such a good Messiah matchup that it's fine. And you already have a pretty good Jet matchup because Jet hates having the board retired. That's why Welsha's good against it. Sanctitude is not very necessary in here. So you could play a 4th effect trigger or effect PG, and it would probably actually come up more often than Sanctitude would. And then next, a lot of people might be wondering how we're cutting costs in this deck, and shockingly, it's cutting the Persona Rides. So yes, Persona Ride is very good in here. Being able to make all of your attacks very unguardable is pretty good, but this deck doesn't need it as badly as most other standard decks, mainly because Gandeeva gives you a lot of bound cards, and then it also has the giant front row power boost from those bound cards. So because of that, we can actually cut these $25 cards and shave off $75 from our cost. So just between these 4 cards, we shave off about $100 out of that deck. And last I checked, this deck costed around like $250. So we just naturally make it cheaper that way. So being able to shave off the 100 really makes a difference. And you can build your deck around not having Persona Ride by having either more cards that gain power or more ways to bound cards. Because we lose out on Persona Ride, it's mandatory that we have to take out the Cyclers, which are also like $4 last I checked. Because we lose Persona Ride, this is basically just the first effect of when discarded from Ride phase, you put it to bottom, Soul Blast, draw card. We lose out on the second effect, which the second effect does come up a lot, and we don't want a dead card later on, right? We want a card that is versatile enough that it can be used at any point in the game. So we can take these out now, and best harvest is like $4 as well. You could take one out. In this case, we're going to, but you don't need to if you already have them or could afford them. So those are all the cards we are taking out. So we took out 8 cards outside of the Sanctitude. So how are we replacing them? Well, we took out 7 cards outside of Sanctitude. So we're replacing them with 4 Brachioforce. So Brachioforce has a skill that whenever it hits, you can retire Brachioforce, draw a card, and retire an opponent's rear guard. So why is this good? It's a really good call target off of Alpha Card, and it can also like help pressure the opponent's board early on and gives the deck a bit better of an early game. Because if your opponent like starts rushing you really hard early, then you can drop down Brachioforce and then try to attack in the rear guards and either force them to guard, or if they don't guard, then you pop the rear guard that you just hit, and then you can also retire another thing on the board. And then it also replaces itself since it goes in the drop and you draw a card. It also fuels Gandeeva because this will go into drop and then retire something, and then Gandeeva can bind it. So yeah, Brachioforce is pretty good in here. It's also harder to guard naturally because Gandeeva is a really big attacker, or Gandeeva makes it a really big attacker. So yeah, Brachioforce is pretty good in here. And then we'll just finish out playsets of other cards. So we put in the 4th Sturgna and the 3rd and 4th Benaya. And last I checked, this build was roughly about $80 compared to the other one, which is like about $250 to $300-ish. And also for triggers, you can replace this with Olbaria and give 100 million to 2 units. That is completely fine as well. You can also replace the effect fronts if they're still too pricey for you for just normal fronts. Festival Collection, which comes out in about a month, does reprint all the effect triggers, so they might go down a bit more than they currently are. So you could wait until those come out before you buy them. And yeah, that is about it. Thank you all for watching. Gandeeva is going to be really strong, and going into BCS season, in a couple months, you're going to need to know how to play against this deck and have a game plan against it. There are a ton of extra builds that the deck could do. Differfight did a video going over a bunch of different variants of Gandeeva, so I'll link that video in the description as well if you're trying to learn the deck. This is just my personal build right now. It's still probably going to change by the time BCS rolls around. This has felt like very self-sustaining, simple, and not that difficult to play. It kind of plays itself. And yeah, that's about it. If you enjoyed this, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.